Okay? My father had a scar behind one of his ears. I forget, I think it was the left ear. And he tells the story how he got it. When he was a boy, his father, Grandpa Avram, had a horse and a buggy. And in some way, Nathan got close to the horse and got kicked behind the ear. Of course, it drew blood. Instead of my grandfather being very sympathetic and whatnot, he gave him a whack across the face and says, "Keep away from the horse. You should be able to take care of yourself." I don't remember if I told you the story on how we moved to Shaverson Street. When we moved to Fall River, we lived on East Main Street for about a year.
Wait. I'm going to stop you even though we're recording. You said something about your grandfather and his relationship with your father, and you left it there and went on to moving to Shavelson Street.
Shaverson Street.
Whatever. Okay? What you're trying to say, and you didn't say it, is the animosity between your father and your grandfather, which you're trying at this moment to try to figure out, but you're not coming up with an answer.
I have no answer. I don't know. My father didn't talk about such things. My mother sometimes told me stories, but I really don't know. All right? I know my father didn't get along, or he didn't care too much for my grandfather's second wife, the Baba Sura, but outside of that, I don't know.
Your father ever talk about grandfather?
Nope.
In the years that you remember?
Nope.
I mean, he was alive.
He was alive.
They sent packages during the war. You said they sent packages.
I didn't say they sent packages.
Who sent packages to Grandpa Avram during the war?
After the war,
Okay, go ahead.
after the war, my mother said, they sent, and he said, my grandfather said, wrote right back and says, "Do not send anything. We have everything. Do not send any pishkas." The fact that most people in Israel and Palestine at the time were happy to receive presents from America. My grandfather was a very proud individual. He didn't want help from outside.
Even though there was some contact, there was never really any writing afterwards at all.
Not that I know of. I think we have a letter there. I think once World War II was finished, there was definitely a communication. Yes.
Softening of some kind.
I presume as much, because my grandfather wanted to come to visit my father in America. All right. In fact, if you remember, one of the reasons he didn't come because Uncle David made up a fake story that Dr. Keusch told Grandpa that he was not in physical condition to travel. All right. Now, the relationship with my father and his children, my brother and I, was warm and yet limited. That is, we kissed and we hugged and we were friendly, and but he was a normal father of his time. He went to work before we went to school. How did he go to work? We lived in, let me talk about Shaverson Street, just a second. We lived on East Main Street, which was a fairly main street.
That's why it's called Main Street.
Yeah, no, but it's East Main Street. It was not Main Street. Of course, in Fall River, there was East Main Street, South Main Street, and North Main Street. And Main Street.
It's like every small town.
That's not.
That's how small towns.
That's right. Everything was built around.
Was built on a grid.
That's right. Pretty much.
It was a grid. There was a main street, and each thing off that.
Not exactly, but
out of the center was labeled differently.
Yeah. There was a street in Fall River called Shaverson Street. There were 14 houses, 3 families in a house, and this was a man built it special for Jews. And the time we moved there, that I was in 7th grade, there were 42 families. Two of them were not Jewish, and they lived in the same house. My father rented from a man called Mr. Nurim. Nuris. Anyway, Nuris wanted to rent us an apartment on the second floor, but he said, on condition, Mr. Keusch, your children can't make noise. And my father, who was very proud of his children, said, look, Mr. Nuris, if you want the house to be broken down, my sons can do it. But if you want them to be quiet, he cannot do it. You're asking something that's impossible. So you have an idea. I never realized we made that much noise.
Two boys.
2 boys.
2 years apart, right.
2 years apart. So instead of going in one house, he found a different apartment. This man owned half the houses on the street. We went on the first floor to 35 Shaverson Street, where we lived for several years until the neighbor upstairs, Mrs. Kraviff, hung herself in the basement. So we moved to the next house, 45 Shaverson Street, where we lived until my father died. What was my relationship with my father? It's hard to say. First of all, as I started to say, he went to work before we woke up. Now, he went to work, he didn't have a car, he went by taxi. He across the street from us, one of the houses, 2 of the other people that worked for Cromo and Company, Ann and Ben Steinemann, a married couple, took the same bus, same taxi to go to work. They were on the taxi at 6:30, 7 o'clock in the morning, as I say, before I woke up. And it cost them a total, as I remember right, a taxi in Fall River at that time cost 25 cents from one town to another. This was in, we moved there in 1936. By 1938 we moved to Shaverson Street. And this continued until the war. My father, we had supper together, and then my father went to meetings. There was meetings of the party. There were the meetings of the IWO, the Jewish People's Fraternal Organization. There were meetings of this and that. At one stage, I remember I complained to my mother. I says, when are we going to say, when is Daddy going to stay home? And yet my father was very fond. He liked me and my brother. My mother tells the story that when I went away to the army, when I went overseas, not to the army, when I went overseas, my father told her, he says, if something happens to him and he's a cripple, I'll take care of him the rest of his life. That's my mother said. I'll devote my life to taking care of him.
Give me a second. Okay, go ahead.
Just what went on at the meetings that my father went to and what their purpose was and whatnot, I really didn't know. He was even on the Jewish Council of Fall River. Apparently there was a council of representatives of all the Jewish organizations, and my father was a representative of the Jewish People's Fraternal Order.
Question. Have we ever checked any of the files that there should be information on this? These records should be...
Where?
Maybe evil.
No.
Maybe there's a...
Local, no, I don't think so. No. Stop it a minute.
Go ahead.
I went into the Army in September of 1943. Somewhere in July and August, my father decided to go into business for himself. I must go back and say that Cromo and Company business was a manufacturer of ladies' undergarments, panties, nightgowns, ready to wear. My father went into business right before I went into the Army, and he set up 2 companies, Regina Undergarment Company for my mother and Arthur Undergarment Company for my brother. During the war, during the war, he must have done pretty good, because whatever money he made during the war was almost all the money that he saved, and which my mother lived on once he died. Why he went into business during the war is an interesting comment. Everybody told him, don't go into the war now. Don't go into business now. This is not the time to go into business. You can't get elastic. Elastic, if you read a lady's panties had elastic in it. All right? You can't get elastic. Without elastic, you can't make ladies' panties. You can't make nightgowns. My father went into business, and he got he got elastic. He managed. He was a very expert person in working with people. During the war, most men went into the army. The only ones that didn't go into the army were what's called 4F. Those were physically disabled. Therefore, technicians, people who could do things, were limited. And people had...
into the market.
What?
That's when women started working.
Of course. But I'm telling now, when you have a factory of sewing machines, the machines have to be fixed when something goes wrong. Like every mechanical object, things go wrong. You have a factory, you have to have electricians, people who can fix electricity, people who can do the water, all these things. And people had trouble getting mechanics, experts to make these repairs. My father never had any problem. He'd call a man up and say, look, I have a problem, kacha, 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 and the man would be there and fix it. And my father said there was only one solution why they came to him. When they asked him for $50, he paid $50. If they asked for $100, he paid $100. He never argued about the amount or the amount of time and whatnot. When, after the war...
I'm gonna put you back a while because you mentioned something. Did you I think you told about it, what your father did when you played football. Forget it.
Yeah, I have that. About his walking on a sideline. Yeah, I did. After the war, my father closed his private business and went into business with Chromo as a partner, as a part owner. They rented a building or a floor that was the equivalent of a football field. I might digress here a second. This was a building with 4 floors, each the size of a football field, and next to it was another building the same size. If you can imagine 8 football fields, 4 floors. In 1936, the Depression was so bad that this building was sold for $6,000. Anyway, my father went into this business with Chromo, and he was in charge of the ordering, of the management of the factory. Chromo was in New York. He was in charge of the sales. And people worked pretty good with Chromo, or with my father. He never pushed them. He'd give him, a man would have his job to do, and that was his job. And I learned that from him. He says, a man has to do his job. If he does it in 6 hours, so he can take it easy for 2 hours. If he does it in 7 hours, do it in 7 hours. If he does it the main thing, the work has to be done. My father was weird in that he helped the union in his factory to negotiate a contract with his company. He advised...
Would you say conflict of interest?
It was also another conflict of interest. There was a factory...
There's where his politics conflicted with his... With his
being middle class, yeah.
Being an owner of a factory and being a company.
There was one factory...
Sort of really go together.
One factory where in some way or other he was involved in the strike that was being against that factory. And he laughed because I was going out with the daughter of the owner of that factory. That was my good friend Muriel Shapiro, who eventually married Donald. And he said, gee, I hope he doesn't find out that I'm advising the strikers. With Chromo, he was manager, as I say, of the factory. 100, 150 people. When to change the subject now, I mean, when the war was going on here in Palestine in 47 and 48, I remember once Art and I went up and we talked with him, and how Art and I thought the Irgun was accomplishing more than the Haganah, because by the explosions that was being caused by the Irgun, it was keeping it in the headlines, and he didn't think so. When Art and I came back from college in 48, and we wanted to...
Well, we didn't finish the war yet. You didn't come home from the war.
I came home from the war. I got discharged at Fort Devens, the same place that's not far from Boston, not far from where I entered the Army. I came home by bus, and I just a second. And I got off at stop, and I'm walking with my barracks bag, and I walk up the street and get into Shaving Street, and the word must have gone out, because my father and mother started coming down the street, and they were old. I hadn't been home for almost 2 years, and the change, they were gray. You never notice this on your parents if you live with them.
How old were they at that time?
This was 1946, so my father was 46 and 9 was 55. My mother was 2 years younger, 53, and all of a sudden they
looked like older people.
They looked like older people, yeah. My father and mother made a big party for me as a welcome home in the biggest hotel in Fall River, the Mellon Hotel, and there must have been 80, 100 people, all the people that they knew in Fall River, from Boston, in the organization people and friends and whatnot, the workers in the factory with him, the Steinemans, Saul Porcelain, and they did great honor to me, which I took it very unimportant. It was important to him and my mother.
Especially since the biggest thing you did in the Army was play football.
Well, and that was the most the thing after the war. It had nothing to do during the war. I mean, I did earn a combat infantryman's badge. That was worth $10 a month. I went to school in Boston University, 1 semester.
Well, let's finish your father here.
I'm talking about my father. And one day, at the end of the semester, I come home, and I said, I'm changing schools. I'm going to school down in New Mexico. For the reasons that is have nothing to do with this now. And
well, you can mention them anyway.
Well, I was...
You mentioned it in the football thing. But
I think I mentioned, yeah.
You can just make a sentence.
I wasn't getting an education, and when I wanted to change to business administration, they refused to do it. I was not smart enough. I had this Pakida who took care of me and said I was a maladjusted veteran. I suppose I should have gone to a higher level, but I didn't. And Terry Callahan worked out that we got a free ticket to go down to New Mexico and also make a few dollars while we were playing. And so we decided to go to New Mexico. And I come home and I say, I'm leaving Boston University, I'm going to New Mexico. And my father looks at me very straight-faced and says, you couldn't find any place further away in the country? This was my father. This was his positive and his negative. He didn't interfere with what I wanted or what my brother wanted. We decided what we would study in high school, the preparatory for college, not him. We sent away for college catalogs, and he didn't interfere where or what. We picked our courses.
Let me ask you a question, because it reminds me very similar to what I ran into. Part of it, I think, was they were really not involved, or did they know about the college system or the school system. This was a different world, that they had no experience with the high school program or the college program. This was a different world.
Maybe.
Okay.
Maybe.
And how could they interfere into something?
No,
they
but
really
but in
know?
general,
I'm talking in general.
No. I'm talking about my father and his. When I decided I wanted to work in Camp Kinderland, that's when I was 15, 16. I went to my father and I said, "Can you fix it up with me?"
And he said no.
He says, "Of course."
Oh.
He says, "Yeah."
Like Uncle David.
No, he says, "I'll do what I can," and he arranged it.
Again, that was an area that he had knowledge of.
Yeah,
he
but
was not going to give you advice on an area
but
where he had no.
but he did, but he didn't.
Is
He
that
worked
fair?
on the basis
Okay,
that
so-
my decisions
Okay.
were my decisions. All right? He didn't give me advice on what to do in camp or how to.
It's not the same.
And I picked this up from him in my relationship to my children. I did not give that much advice or push. My wife did. Ruth did. All right? I'm talking about me. All right? The Christmas of 1948, Art and I came back in one of the major snowstorms of the East Coast, where New York got 24 inches. We got home. My father was not well. He had not been well since September. This was Christmas. And for the first time, he showed me something that he had never done before. He had a little black book. Oh, little black book. And he tells me, "Look, these people owe me money." And he goes page by page. He says, "This fella here owes me money." He says, "Don't be afraid. You go. Don't let him put you off." Yeah. And then he says, "Here I owe money. This Flintenstein, this was a survivor from Europe who had sent my father money, as they were the cousins, and Uncle Dugir money. And it was something like $3,000 or $4,000. He says, this is his money, Leslie Flintenstein. This is his money. He is entitled to it any time he wants, and he's entitled to it with 2% interest." And there were 3 or 4 or 5 other people that owed him money. Not significant sums, $300, $400, $200, $500, not significant sums. But that's the first time I ever was told anything like that. My father and mother did not confide or ask their children questions. When we were going to go from New York to Fall River, I was not consulted, I was not asked, I was not even advised. This was something that was going to be, and it was. How I would be affected by it, and how I would be dislocated, and how I would lose all my friends was not even taken into consideration. Of course, Ruth and I did the same thing with our children. We didn't, when we decided to come to Israel, we didn't ask or convey or consult. My father had a terrible disease, cancer of the pancreas. At the time we saw him in Christmas time, he was not feeling well. Usually we would give each other hugs, and I would sometimes wrestle with him a little bit. And this time when I wanted to do that, he says, no, stop, don't do that. Art and I went back to school, and during the month of January, he was supposed to go down to Florida. The doctor had finally decided that whatever pains he claimed he had in the abdomen area were psychological, and that he was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. And so my father ordered tickets for my mother and him to go down to Florida. And the day he was supposed to get on the train, I think it was a train or the plane, I don't remember, he went to the hospital.
Probably a train.
Went to the hospital in Boston. They told me that this was one of the best hospitals for cancer.
They didn't know he had cancer yet.
They didn't know he had cancer yet, but they took him into his hospital. It was a very well-known hospital. I don't remember the name. And they opened him up exploratory. Opened him up, and then they sewed him right up, because the cancer had gone so far that nothing could be done about it. In fact, to this day, I understand pancreas cancer of the pancreas is just there's nothing you can do about it. My mother waited until the last minute to call Art and I to tell us to come home. My father and mother believed in education. They believed that the